Okay, so we are going to be talking about the properties of parallelograms and some things that we know about the angles of parallelograms. So one of the things that we know about a parallelogram is that the opposite angles are congruent to each other. So this angle is congruent to this angle because those are on opposite sides of the parallelogram. And this angle is congruent to this angle because they are on opposite sides of the parallelogram. The other thing that we know is adjacent angles or consecutive angles are supplementary. So if I call this angle A and this angle B, the measurement of angle A plus angle B have to equal 180 degrees. So the measure of A plus the measure of B have to equal 180 degrees. Same is true if I were to call this angle down here angle D. Angle A and angle D also are supplementary, okay? So they're supplementary going up and down, they're supplementary going across. So as an example, let's say that I told you that angle D was 65 degrees. I would be able to find all of the other angles on this shape by just knowing that one particular angle. So I'll call this one down here C as well. All right, so the first thing that I would do is I would say, well, I know that my opposite angles are congruent. So if angle D is 65 degrees, angle B is also 65 degrees. Those two angles have to have the same measure. Then to find angle A and angle B, or I'm sorry, angle C, I know those two are also going to be congruent to each other. But to figure out what they are, I know that angle A plus D has to equal 65 degrees. So if I don't know how big angle A is, I'm going to just call that X. I do know that angle D is 65 degrees, and these have to add together to be 180. So I would subtract 65 degrees off of both sides, and then I would find that the measure of angle A has to be 115 degrees. All right, so this angle is 115 degrees, which means angle C is also 115 degrees. So I can use these same properties even if I have questions that involve some algebra instead of involving just numbers. So in a question like this, I see that I've got the opposite angles of my parallelogram, and I know that this angle and this angle have to be congruent to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up an equation in order to be able to solve to figure out what that missing angle is. So I see that this angle up here is 4A minus 4, and then this angle down here is 2A plus 30. So those two have to be equal to each other because that's what it means if two angles are congruent. And then now this is just an equation to solve in order to be able to figure out what is A. So my first thing I'm going to do is gather all of my letters together. So I'm going to subtract 2A from both sides of the equation. So 4A minus 2A gives me 2A. Drop down my 4. My 2A's here will cancel. Drop down my 30. Now I need to add a 4 onto both sides of the equation. Drop down my 2A. The 4's will cancel. 30 plus 4 is 34. And then my final step is to divide both sides of the equation by 2. So I get that A is equal to 34 divided by 2, which is 17. All right, so a question like that, if I just have to figure out the measure of angle A, I know, or I'm not angle A, but how big is A? It is 17. If I have a question that asks me to actually find the measure of the angle, then what I could do is I could take that 17 and plug it in place of the letter A, and then I could use that in order to figure out how big the angle is. So what I would do is I would say, well, 2, if A is 17, I'm going to replace the A with 17 and then plus 30. So 2 times 17 is 34, plus 30, which is 64. So that means the measure of this angle is 64 degrees. And I should get the same thing up here. So I would do 4 times 17 minus 4. So 4 times 17 is 68, and 68 minus 4 is 64. And since I got the same thing for both, I know that I solved it correctly. Right, another scenario you would see is something like this, where I am given my parallelogram and I see that I have this acute angle here and this obtuse angle down here. I know that those are not congruent to each other. I can tell by looking at them that they are different sizes since one's acute and one's obtuse. So instead, these are consecutive angles, and I know that consecutive angles are supplementary. So in order to solve this problem, I need to take these two angle measurements and add them together and make them equal 180. So I will say 6x plus 48 plus 4x plus 22 is equal to 180. So my first step is to go through and combine together my like terms. So I have a 6x and a 4x that I can combine together to make 10x. I've got 48 plus 22, which I can combine together to make 70. And this is equal to 180. All right, and then now I have a two-step equation to solve for x. So I am going to subtract 70 from both sides of the equation. I get that 10x is equal to 110. And then my final step would be to divide each side of the equation by 10. And I get that x is equal